Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield done. Now the long walk back to the lodge. 3:55 a.m., just signed in. Santanoni Range, let's go. The wind is whipping here in the Seward Range today. Just finished the Macomb slide and my legs are on fire. Well, I fell victim to the floating logs again. Made it to the top of East Dix. Peak number 3 of 5 for today here in the Dix Range. Avalanche Pass. On top of Rocky Peak Bridge. It's like a hurricane up here. Rain and wind here on Tabletop. Whiteface, number 6. Muddy day here on Street and Nye for number 7 and 8. Sunny and blue on Haystack. Algonquin, up in the clouds, number 18. Gothic's number 22. Panther, number 38. Allen, number 45. 7:12 a.m. Big Slide, Adirondack, 46er. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast.
March 18th, 2020. It was a sunny afternoon and was supposed to hit a high of 40 degrees today, so after lunch I decided to get out on the trail and take advantage of this spring-like winter weather in the ADK. I decided to revisit some mountains I hiked a few years ago but haven't been back to since and figured it was the perfect day for it. My sights were set on heading west to Tupper Lake to hike Coney, Goodman, and Mount Arab, the 3 peaks which make up the Tupper Lake Triad. A great little hiking challenge around Tupper Lake in the Horseshoe Lake Wild Forest. These 3 mountains offer unique views of an area not often seen, and they can all be done in a single afternoon. So the sun was shining, and it was time to hit the trail. My plan for today was to start with the 2-mile trip up and down Coney Mountain, then drive the mile over to the Goodman Mountain trailhead to complete that 3.4-mile hike, and finally make my way across Tupper Lake to the 2-mile out and back trail up Mount Arab, a mountain which boasts great views with an Adirondack fire tower on top. Each peak individually or the 3 mountains combined make for a great day hike for the whole family, totaling 7.5 miles and 1,900 feet of elevation gain. A great way to spend a sunny, spring-like afternoon in the Adirondacks. I packed up my gear in the van and drove 45 minutes west down Route 3 to Route 30, and then eventually passing the trailhead for Goodman before arriving at the trailhead for Coney just up the road, the first mountain of the day. When I pulled in, the 5 or 6 car parking lot was pretty full, so I backed down to the road and parked on the shoulder. Plenty of room on this road to park, so it wasn't really a problem. But I had a feeling the trails might be busy today given the weather and the state of the world. Despite the fact that it's still winter, I left my snowshoes in the car since I knew I wouldn't really be needing them today. I hiked today in a lightweight base layer, North Face shell pants, and a Techwick long sleeve. No hat and no gloves needed today, so they stayed in my pack. I signed in just after 1 o'clock and began the 1.1 mile to the summit. The Tupper Lake Winter Triad is officially beginning.
Just after 1 o'clock here on Wednesday the 18th. Planning to hike the Tupper Lake Triad today. So I'm here at the Horseshoe Lake Wild Forest, starting with Coney, which is a 1.1 mile trip up. A lot of the snow is melted here. Winter is certainly winding down, but it's still very much winter. So the trail is kind of an ice skating rink, but here we go.
The trail up Coney Mountain is a relatively new trail, and it's mostly covered with hard dirt and small boulders throughout. So in the summer, you're often hopping from rock to rock as you make your way up. Today, however, was a mix of soft snow in some places, and then melted areas with nothing but the leftover packed icy sidewalk in others, directly covering the trail. So I wore my micro spikes all day, which was what I anticipated needing at this point into the season.
So right from the start, the trail starts gaining elevation, winding through a pretty open forest right now. Mostly hardwoods around me. Following the blue trail markers. Trail is very obvious. Spring is coming. You can tell by all the melted snow around, but winter's hanging on. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get snowsued.
The first quarter of a mile, the trail moves north, parallel with the road below as it winds its way around the western slope of the mountain, and by the end of the hike, you'll have almost done a circle around the mountain as you climb up. So with this in mind, once the trail begins climbing, it's a very steady and consistent climb to the top, where you'll end up climbing up the northern and eastern slopes of the peak. Since the trail wraps around the mountain, it's never really too strenuous and it's quite consistent, therefore making it another great choice for the whole family or someone who's new to hiking. The whole mountain is covered in hardwood trees, so it's a very open forest this time of year especially, since the leaves haven't quite bloomed yet. but soon. Come on, spring.
So not long into the hike up Coney, you'll wind around and then start hiking left or north around the mountain here before we start climbing up. Even though this kind of goes up in a nice gradual pace, but the trail keeps going from icy sidewalk to snow to leaves and mud back to an icy sidewalk with nothing else on it as far as snow goes. So it's definitely the end of the season here.
I passed a couple of hikers coming down, including a group of 6 or 7 with multiple children. So as I mentioned, it's a great choice for the whole family. After I began to climb, the half-melted, half-ice sidewalk turned into a mostly covered snow forest, with some melted spots here and there, but the trail was all covered with nice packed snow at this point, making for a nice, fast trip up the mountain.
Continuing to climb up the ridge here, I can see Goodman Mountain, the place I'll go next, through the trees to my left. Since there's no leaves on the trees, you can see it today. At this point, the trail is like a snow-covered sidewalk and everywhere is covered in snow. So we're a little higher up, less snow melted around. Good thing I have my micro spikes. I left the snowshoes in the car because I knew I wasn't going to need those, but we got our spikes, which were very necessary.
The final 0.1 miles of the hike climbs up the rocky summit, which you can see through the trees as the trail approaches this climb. Around this point, you'll hike to the left of the ridge before climbing up the final approach onto the large, open summit where full 360-degree views await. It's a rock ledge, not exactly what I would call a scramble per se, but that sort of idea. I continued up and climbed onto the summit where I was greeted by 2 girls and an extremely happy-to-see-me Labrador Retriever, wagging his tail in excitement of my arrival at 1:26 p.m., exactly 20 minutes since I signed in. Coney Mountain, standing 2,250 feet elevation, and Tupper Lake Triad peak number 1 of 3 for the day.
It's 1:26. I just made it to the top of Coney, so about 20 minutes up. The summit is a huge rocky summit, which is awesome. Great views of pretty much everything around you. You can see Goodman Mountain where you're going to go next, and I can see the high peaks to the east. Marcy and Algonquin are still super covered in snow. 360-degree views up top. Pretty awesome.
The views from this summit are my favorite of the 3. Goodman Mountain, where I'll hike next, is directly in front to the north, with some high peaks visible from the east, such as the still very snow-covered Algonquin and Marcy summits, along with a nice view of Mount Morris. And if you want to go on a quick, low-effort hike and spend a couple hours on top of a fantastic summit on a nice sunny day, Coney Mountain is a great option for that. I stayed up there for around 10 minutes, took it all in, snapped a photo or 2, and then started my hike down through the open hardwood forest back to the trailhead. Since the trees were bare, the whole day had views that I didn't get to see the last time I visited these mountains, since the trees were covered in leaves. So most of the hike down, I could see Goodman on my right through the trees, so that was nice.
Cruising down the trail right now. As much as I'm ready for spring and summer hiking, I am really going to miss descents in the winter with the trail nice and filled in and nice and smooth and soft and easy on the joints. Doesn't require much thinking. I will miss that as far as winter hiking goes, but I'm certainly ready for spring. My joints, however, will miss winter, that's for sure.
The trail, as you imagine, was quick up and quick down, and I was back at the trailhead at 1:50, totaling a 45-minute trip up, on top, and down Coney Mountain. Time to hop back in my van and take a right out of the trailhead, and then drive about a mile down the road to the Goodman Trailhead for the next peak of the afternoon. And just like that, I arrived at the Goodman Trailhead. The first time I drove to these peaks, I actually missed both trailheads because I was looking on the opposite side of the road, and the trailhead signs from the road have the mountain names much smaller and Horseshoe Lake Wild Forest is much bigger. So be on the lookout for the signs, they can certainly be missed. And the trailheads are both on the same side of the road as well. They're on your left if you're coming from Tupper Lake. I pulled in and parked alongside a few cars, not too many over here, grabbed my backpack, signed in, and started walking the 1.4-mile trail to Goodman.
It is 2 o'clock, officially starting to hike into Goodman. 1.6 miles to the summit. So 3.2 round trip. And this little stream that you walk along at the beginning here was used in the 1800s as a watering hole for horse-drawn carriages and stagecoaches and whatnot. So that's a fun little fact about this mountain here. Couple cars in the parking lot, people out enjoying the sunshine.
And some fun facts. Goodman Mountain is named after Andrew Goodman, a New York City native and a civil rights activist who was killed by the KKK in 1964 for helping to register African American voters in Mississippi. Goodman's family had a camp in Tupper Lake where they vacationed and summered. You can read more about Andrew Goodman at the sign-in registry where they have a lot of information on him specifically. Another nice thing about this trail is the first 3/4 of a mile or so, it walks in the woods on a 3 or 4 foot paved path before making a left onto the mountain. And this was designed for families with young children, people in a wheelchair, or other limited mobility folks so they can get out in the woods too. Very cool. The path was snow-covered in some points, and then bare in others, and then snow-covered, and then bare. So the walk up, I eventually took off the micro spikes, and then I put them back on, and then I took them off, and then I put them back on. So that was the story of that trail. While walking up the path, I passed a young couple who I saw leaving Coney as I was arriving, and I'd run into them a couple more times today as they were also hiking all 3 peaks today. I eventually finished the straight paved path into the woods, and I made the left up the small staircase and began following the red trail markers to the summit of Goodman.
2:14, just finished the approach in to the sign that says trail to the left, and now I'm going into the woods off the concrete path and into the real trail part here, following red trail markers. As of now, the snow is still here, slowly starting to melt, but the trail is definitely still covered in snow. Micro spikes a must.
Similar to Coney, this mountain is filled with hardwood trees, with of course spruces and pines peppered in here and there as well, but it was mostly hardwood trees without the leaves, so it doesn't take too long to see some nice views through the open and bare forest, including front row views of Coney, where I just came from, to my left looking south. The trail winds and weaves its way through the woods for a good half a mile, only gaining a little elevation as you make your way around the western slope to the northern side of the mountain. And the trail here was similar to Coney as you'd expect, since the peaks are right next to one another. Plenty of melted snow in the woods, with the trail being either a partially melted ice sidewalk or still covered in packed snow. And some stretches of dirt and mud, but mostly still pretty winter-like.
Nice and quiet in the woods today. So I'm winding and weaving through the woods on the trail here on this super open forest. And I'm about to climb up to this ridge to my left. I can see the trail going up there. So it's going to start to get a little steeper at this point. For the first chunk, it's been a pretty mellow hike through the woods. But now we climb. And therefore now we breathe heavier as well.
About half a mile after turning into the woods is where the trail starts climbing up to the ridge. You'll wrap around to the left and you'll gain about 200 feet of elevation over a third of a mile, which in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of elevation gain, but in regards to this hike, it's where you'll gain the most elevation over the shortest span as you climb up to the shoulder. I didn't pass anybody else while I was in the woods during my ascent, and once climbing up to the ridge, you'll be met with more big spruce trees, and this final stretch along the summit was actually quite bare in terms of snow. Surprising, there was no snow up here. It was also nice seeing some areas that if you look at just the right angle and you block out a little bit to the side here, a little bit to the side there, and you just look straight, you can't tell if it's July or if it's March. Man, is it spring yet? I need spring.
Just finished climbing up to the summit ridge here. I can see the big rocks up top that'll be climbing up, which is the actual summit. But I'm pretty much here at the moment, just after 2:30. So pretty much a half hour since signing in. Nice views up top here.
And when you're up here, there's great views of the lakes and rivers down below through the trees. And once on the summit ridge, you'll walk over to the true summit, which is a rocky ledge with great views of Coney next door, along with Blue Mountain, Snowy Mountain, and plenty more in the distance. You'll have some views of Santanoni and Seward, but they're kind of hidden behind a tree, but overall, it's a fun vibe at this summit. I made it up and walked onto the summit rock just after 2:30 p.m., totaling 30 minutes from the sign